welcome to Stillspeakpod. Is anyone even a little surprised that there's more updates on the unraveling of the Murdaugh family? I'm not, that's for sure. I did an update just a few days ago, and all I have to say is, but wait, there's more. And I say that because it reminds me of that meme that's circulating. I'll actually put it in the video. It should be in the video right now as I'm speaking because I'm going to add it to it. Now, we do have a couple of updates. Now, it's nothing significant. It's just more that's connected to the Murdaugh family and what all is going on in Hampton County at this point. We still don't know who killed Paul and Maggie Murdaugh. So now, Mallory Beach, we all know as the 19-year-old who was killed in the boating accident that Paul Murdaugh was involved in 2019. And her mother has several lawsuits against people because the kids were using fake IDs to get alcohol. And this was all prior to the accident that ended up killing her daughter. And so she has all these lawsuits. And her attorney is accusing someone affiliated with the Parker's convenience store, which is one of the places they bought alcohol from, of selling confidential information to a New York reporter. The attorney, Mark Tinsley, is accusing this unknown person of selling a mediation video and notes to a former CNN journalist named Vicky Ward. And Vicky Ward has actually put out a statement in which she said, quote, "The allegations that I bought anything is false. I had a very pleasant meeting with Mark Tinsley, but there was obviously some crossed wires in our conversation, which he may have misinterpreted. I never bought anything from anyone for journalistic purposes, and I never would. I am deeply sorry he got that impression," unquote. And Mark's firm served Vicky Ward with a subpoena about a month ago for her sworn testimony about this alleged sale, according to a copy of the subpoena that was filed in Beaufort County. And they wanted, deposition from her as well as depositions of two private investigators allegedly working for the Parker's convenience store or Parker's attorneys. They were scheduled for today. Vicky Ward's attorney, named Fenno, I believe that's how you say his last name, Fenno, he attempted to squash Tinsley's subpoena this past Friday with a motion, and he argued that Vicky Ward does not have to testify because of South Carolina's SHIELD law, which protects journalists from disclosing information they gained while reporting. And in his motion, he did not concede that Ward obtained the confidential information that Mark Tinsley accused Parker's of selling. And in the motion, it included a copy of Vicky Ward's affidavit that said that she's working on a documentary about the Murdaugh family. Yeah, her and probably like 50,000 million other people. And that when she showed up for an interview with Mark Tinsley, the attorney for Renee Beach, on September 17th, she was served with this subpoena. And Ward ended up not showing up for her deposition that was scheduled today for 10 a.m. So that's interesting. A few episodes ago, I mentioned that a reporter had claimed on the Nancy Grace's show that he had a source that said Maggie Murdaugh, this is Alex's wife, had also hired a forensic accountant prior to her murder, just like Alex's law firm later did. This obviously would give a massive motive if Alex found out about it, right? And I'm not huge on sources. I've said that before because so often it's later confirmed to be a bunch of BS. I'm just going to be real. So I take source information, I kind of just store it in the memory bank, and I wait to see if anything else comes out that supports it. So, take any type of source information with a grain of salt. So now People magazine is sort of backing up this other reporter who was on Nancy Grace's show, but let me just say this. People magazine has a rather decent track record in most people's eyes. I personally am not a fan of People magazine just because of how they handle prior cases that I followed closely, and it drives me nuts when any outlet cannot even get the basics of the story right. They just lose credibility to me personally. But to most people, they are credible. But they claim that 6 weeks prior to her murder, Maggie met with a South Carolina divorce attorney, and that their source is a law enforcement member who is familiar with the investigation. So allegedly in late April, she met with a lawyer to explore her options, and it wasn't fully disclosed what was discussed, but supposedly Maggie had begun to look into the finances prior to this to see what the assets were in the marriage. And they also mention an unnamed co-worker who says that Maggie, just prior to her death, had stopped coming to the office to have lunch with Alex like she had done in the past. So it could be true, right? I mean, it's not far-fetched to think that people get divorced all the time, so it's not a stretch by any means. It's totally plausible. The thing I'm seeing, though, is that there's so many anonymous sources in this case, and a lot of them claim that they're still fearful of this family, which at this point, Alex has completely destroyed his family's name, and I just don't see why still people are so scared of this name and they just want to be anonymous. It's just a little strange. But the Daily Mail, which has a so-so reputation, some people call it a daily fail, as they're claiming they have an anonymous source as well who has known the Murdaugh family for about 3 years, and this person went on to say, Alex and Maggie didn't look at each other like they were married. They didn't seem to have any love between them. She never saw them touch or be affectionate to one another. And that Alex seemed to be checked out of the family, and that she was basically stuck in this marriage, and that Maggie has started to put money away. She didn't know, though, if Maggie was planning to leave or she knew that she didn't have money to pay the bills. She was holding on to whatever money she had. And she said also that she remembered one day that it must have been a few months before she was killed that she was crying because she had written a check at a charity luncheon and it ended up being coming back as bounced. The check bounced. And Maggie was mortified and upset. So again, this makes me a little uncomfortable because it's an anonymous source, okay? But it's also one that it's not too much of a reach to believe, okay? I'm sure these money issues involving Alex Murdaugh was not something new. And so it's plausible, right? And who knows? Maggie might have known about his addiction. Now, I know it was claimed that Alex had an addiction for 20 years to opiates. And somebody did comment on my video saying that they're not sure that they believe that. And I agree with that person. If you're listening, I do. The only thing that kind of trips me up here is opiate addiction is harder to spot than, let's say, crack or heroin. It's a little bit harder to spot. And so there are times that people have this addiction for quite some time before anybody knows about it. If I had to guess, though, I don't think it was 20 years. But I would say probably 3 to 5 years at least. And maybe it just wasn't as obvious to people around them. Or maybe people did know and they just never said anything, right? How many times do people know about addiction and never actually confront the person? And even if you confront the person, doesn't mean that they're going to change and get help for their addiction. So who knows? People may have known. So even if Maggie knew about that, then it would stand to reason that she would hire an accountant if she's wanting to divorce him because she's had enough and she wants to know how much he's spending on the opiates and what have you. So it's believable, right? And this definitely gives Alex motive, right? Like a huge amount of motive. If she was the only one to know about his addiction, to silence her, if there was all these money issues prior and it wasn't just misappropriating of funds after her death, then that's a motive. If she was wanting to divorce him, there's a motive. So, yeah. And this same source talked more about the dogs, which was kind of fascinating. It talked about, that Maggie actually really loved to be at the dog kennels and that she loved the dogs and that there was one dog that she was particularly fond of and that this routine of her going down to the dog kennels once a day, usually in late afternoon or after the sun was setting or as it was setting, it was sort of her thing that everybody knew she did. And this source is claiming that Maggie had expressed that she was worried about Paul with the summer months coming the summer was beginning, that he would start drinking and partying more. And so she had this fear that he was inheriting his father's problem with addiction. And so she was trying to find ways to spend more time with Paul. And so he was helping her. She asked him to help her with the kennels in the evenings so that she can keep an eye on him. And, so she can go and make sure the dogs were okay as well. And we all know that Paul and Maggie's lifeless bodies were found by Alex Murdaugh by the dog kennels. And Alex said this in his 911 call. And I always found it so strange that they would be out there by these dog kennels together. Like, why are you out by these dog kennels together on this huge, sprawling property? It was just a strange location. And I said in a prior episode, and a few people were like, oh my God, good point, that when it came out recently that Alex Murdaugh had told a story that his housekeeper, Gloria Satterfield, had tripped over his dogs and fell and later died. Well, when I heard this, the first thing that stuck out to me was, oh my gosh, Maggie and Paul were found by the dog kennels. And that came from Alex's mouth too, right? He's the one that said, I'm out by the dog kennels. I found their lifeless bodies. And he's also the one who's now, we're finding out, was the one to say that Gloria Satterfield, quote unquote, tripped over his dogs. So it was just a weird coincidence to me. It could be something, could be nothing like a coincidence, like I just said. But it just stuck out to me that these dogs are mentioned by Alex, involving now 3 different deaths. I also recently shared with you that the sons of Gloria Satterfield had not received any of the settlement money from Alex Murdaugh following their mother's death, and that they didn't even know that the suits that were filed had reached a settlement until reporters ascended on Hampton County after Paul and Maggie's murders, and an investigative reporter was digging into the Murdaugh family. And that's when they found out that they had even settled. And they recently filed a suit against Alex about this, and his friend, who's an attorney as well, Corey Flemings. Just a few weeks ago, they filed this. Well, those sons have reached a settlement with the Beaufort lawyer friend of Alex Murdaugh, who had been accused of working with Alex regarding withholding of this death settlement money. Corey Fleming and his firm has to pay back all legal fees and expenses, and it says that Mr. Fleming and his law firm had received $4.3 million they recovered from the estate in connection with the claims against Alex Murdaugh for the death of Gloria Satterfield. and that came from their attorney, the son's attorney. The agreement was reached on Friday, but the settlement was announced yesterday. So $4.3 million settlement was reached in 2019. Nearly $1.5 million was set aside in attorney fees, which, holy moly. And the order said that $2.76 million was supposed to be paid to the Satterfield family. So there are settled with Corey Fleming in that aspect of it. There's still going to be obviously issues with Alex Murdaugh and these sons. And then also a judge denied a request to move a lawsuit regarding the 2019 boating accident death of Mallory Beach out of Hampton County as the controversy over the Murdaugh family political influence. And, it would definitely be argued by me that they have little to no influence anymore thanks to Alex Murdaugh, but that's what was said. 16th Circuit Judge Daniel D. Hall denied the change of venue motion, ruling that defendant Greg Parker, the CEO of Parker's Convenience Store, failed to present enough evidence that changing the venue would promote convenience of witnesses and ends of justice. The plaintiff, Beach's mother, Renee Beach, as well as the other two defendants, Alex and Buster Murdaugh, are all from Hampton County and had opposed the change of venue. And just as a reminder, Paul was seen on surveillance camera purchasing alcohol at the convenience store in Ridgeland, South Carolina, and he allegedly was using an ID that belonged to his older brother, Buster Murdaugh, who's been completely silent through this entire murder mystery and the deaths of his mother and brother. And that was on February 24th in 2019, and the credit card that was used belonged to Maggie Murdaugh. Before the motion was denied, a state representative, Muriel Smith, out of Sumter, was recently hired as one of the Parker's defense attorneys, and it was argued in court that the venue should move to Beaufort County, where the boat crash actually happened, and where 60 plus potential witnesses live. That's a lot of witnesses. Quote, I'm up here doing my job. I'm not here as a legislator. I'm here as an attorney. And this is what he told reporters outside the courthouse. He said, quote, I handle complex and difficult cases, especially in rural areas of the state. And I've done that throughout the last 10 years, and I have a track record of being able to get defense verdicts in areas of the state that presumably don't see defense verdicts. They were looking to add to the team, so they called and added me, unquote. So basically, the reporters were trying to say, like, is this a conflict? Because you're a legislator, and he has certain roles as a legislator. Is that going to conflict with him practicing as an attorney on this case? And then also Mark Tinsley, who we talked about earlier, that's Renee Beach's attorney, made several motions, including for medical records belonging to Alex Murdaugh, who was released on bond last month and allowed to travel to an out-of-state rehab facility without GPS monitoring to treat a opiate addiction. So that's pretty wild that he was able to actually travel to an out-of-state rehab facility with no GPS monitoring on him, considering this man had just set up a plan to have himself killed for insurance money for his son. So that's a very strange decision to allow him to do that. And the saga of the Murdaugh family continues with more updates, I'm sure, soon. It's definitely a case that just seems to keep on giving, right? It just keeps on giving us. And there's so many branches off of this story. It's really breathtaking at times that there's just so much to the story. And I feel like The story is so complex and so twisted and has so many branches, like I just said. But at the same time, I feel like it's so simple. Does that make sense? It feels simple in the sense that this is cut and dry. There's a lot of moving pieces and parts and what have you, but when you really boil it down, it's really, really simple. And most everything surrounding this family, if you break it down even further, just keeps going back to Alex Murdaugh. Specifically. And we're going to see what that goes. I have my theory. I've kind of shared it here. I've at least hinted at it. My working theory at this moment, after going through this and getting all this information and, researching it and what have you, is that I personally, at this point, do believe that Alex Murdaugh had either killed Paul and Maggie Murdaugh or had them killed. I could be wrong. That's my current working theory. I know many of you feel the same way, and we'll see. And I think that's why I have this feeling that how complex the story is, I still feel that the answer to it all is simple. And I think that's why I think that, because in my mind, I think Alex is behind that as well. So, until next time, I'll see you soon.